Buenas a todos, bienvenidos al campus de la Universidad Francisco Marroquín. Mi nombre es Eduardo Fernández y hoy estamos con el profesor Henry Edmondson. El profesor Hank Edmondson es Carl Vinson Professor en el Georgia College, una institución adscrita al sistema de universidades estatales del estado de Georgia en Estados Unidos. Ha participado en numerosos eventos académicos aquí en el campus de la Universidad Francisco Marroquín y hoy vamos a tener una breve entrevista sobre el Federalista, una de las conferencias almuerzo en las que ha participado en esta visita a nuestro querido campus. Profesor, ¿qué es el Federalista?
It's been a pleasure to be here. That's an important question for all of us because I think the Federalist Papers are relevant to a lot of politics, and not just in the U.S., but around the world. The Federalist Papers, sometimes called the Federalist, were 85 essays that were written by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay, and they were written to argue for the ratification of the Constitution of 1787, the Philadelphia Constitution. They were first issued as anonymous editorials in New York newspapers. It took place in New York because New York was a tough battleground for the ratification of the Constitution. Later, they were more widely distributed. Ultimately, they became a bound volume. Initially, the author was listed as Publius. Publius was a pseudonym, which was the custom of the day. Publius had been a Roman general who had been responsible for saving the Republic, the Roman Republic at an important time in history. And today, at least in the States, the Federalist Papers are taught hopefully in high school. I think it can differ from high school to high school and at the university as well.
Si tuviésemos, profesor, que observar qué capítulos, qué partes del Federalista son más interesantes para el joven estudiante, ¿qué partes recomienda?
Well, the two papers that are most usually taught and introduced are papers number 10 and paper number 51. That's just become a habit. I'm not sure that's the best idea. Those two papers are actually fairly complex. They're abstract. The arguments are not easy to understand or even to articulate. But those are the first two that come up. I would say, if you just want a handful of papers to read, you want to read number 1. It's the introduction to all the papers, and it also raises a couple of interesting questions, such as, can we really create a government out of sort of a whole cloth, or do we have to wait for a government to evolve? That was a big question at the time. The obvious answer at paper number 1 is, I think we could just sit down and design a government that's going to work. Paper number 1 also, again, gives you an overview of what's coming in the next 84 papers. Paper number 10 is important. It's actually a series of 2 papers, 9 and 10, and so it should be read in that way. It deals with the perennial problem of the tyranny of the majority that has been an object of concern and study for political philosophers for centuries, if not millennia. Paper number 23 is an emphatic explanation of why the previous Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, won't work. So it's important to read that to understand the need for the new Constitution and also understand why some of the principles are embedded in the Constitution or processes or institutions, and that reason being previous institutions and processes and ideas did not work in the Articles of Confederation. Paper 37 is the most philosophic of the papers, and it introduces a really important question: how do you construct a government that on the one hand is strong enough to do what a government needs to do, on the other hand, a government that is Republican enough, a government that is responsive enough to the people accountable. And so in that paper, the writer, I think, to try to help the people understand how difficult a task it was to write a new constitution, and therefore it ought to deserve some sympathy and some inspection. Paper 45 argues that the state governments have nothing to fear from the new national government. That really hasn't proven true. but it's an interesting paper. 47 through 51 are about separation of powers. It's an argument on the part of the writers of the Constitution, in this case James and Madison, that this government, as designed in Philadelphia, adheres to the very important principle of separation of powers, as it was explained by Montesquieu, the French political philosopher Montesquieu. From there, the papers launch into a discussion of the various institutions of government. So you have a series of papers on the House of Representatives. I think the most interesting paper there is number 55, just because it involves a discussion of how much worse people will behave and how much more flawed their thinking and their self-restraint is when they're part of a group as opposed to when they are by themselves or in smaller groups. Really interesting observation of human nature. Paper, the Senate series of papers there isn't really one paper that stands out in those that run from 62 to 66. Papers 67 through 77 are about the chief executive. In there, if you had to pick one, it would be paper number 70 because it explains the importance of having a strong chief executive. Paper 78 is about the Supreme Court. Those papers run from 78 to 83. 78 is interesting, if only because it has this interesting claim, if not a bit notorious in light of history, that the Supreme Court will be the least dangerous branch of government. From there, paper number 84 sort of summarizes what's gone on, but it also addresses the issue of a Bill of Rights, so that's worth your attention. And then finally, the second bookend to all 85 essays, number 85, is important because unlike paper number 1, which argues for the possibility of designing a government from scratch, paper number 85 flips the coin and says, at this point, we can't design something perfect, and therefore, and Hamilton refers to the Scottish political philosopher David Hume, therefore we need time, we need trial and error, and we need experience to make this thing the way it really should be.
Bueno, pues después de esta breve introducción al Federalista, esa gran obra del pensamiento político estadounidense, nos despedimos, no sin antes agradecerle, profesor, pues su estancia aquí en la universidad. A todos ustedes, muchas gracias y hasta la próxima.